Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the observation bunker, watching the massive creatures through the reinforced glass. The Kythera moved like liquid shadow across the crimson plains of Zarian Prime, their six-legged forms flowing over the rocky terrain with predatory grace. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, their obsidian fur rippling with muscles that could crush a human skull without effort. "Still think you can work with them?" Commander Hayes asked, his voice carrying the weight of 3 failed diplomatic missions. The last xenobiologist lasted exactly 4 days before they tore him apart. Sarah adjusted her field recorder, never taking her eyes off the pack. Dr. Morrison made the mistake of approaching their territory during a hunt. "I've been studying their behavioral patterns for 6 months. They're not mindless predators, Commander. They have complex social structures, intricate communication systems, and most importantly, they protect their young with the same fierce loyalty that humans do." Through the observation window, Sarah watched the pack's alpha, a massive male with silver-streaked fur and scars crisscrossing his hide. The Kythera had no formal name for him in human records, but the field teams had dubbed him Shadowfang for the way his elongated canines caught the light of Zarion's twin suns. He stood at the center of his pack, 17 adult Kythera arranged in a perfect circle around him, their heads lowered in submission. But Sarah's attention wasn't on the adults. Hidden behind the protective wall of their parents' bodies, she could see the cubs. Smaller versions of their parents, no bigger than earth wolves, they tumbled and played in the safety of the pack's center. Their fur hadn't yet developed the adults' midnight black coloration, instead showing mottled patterns of gray and silver that would darken as they matured. "The Colonial Senate is losing patience," Hayes continued. "The mining consortium wants to begin operations in Sector 7, but that's right in the middle of their territory. If we can't establish some kind of peaceful contact soon, you'll authorize lethal force," Sarah finished. "Commander, these beings are clearly sapient. They use tools, they have language, they mourn their dead. Slaughtering them for mining rights would be genocide." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, watching as one of the cubs strayed too far from the pack center and was gently nudged back by its parent. "You have 1 week, Dr. Chen. If you can't establish meaningful contact by then, I'm authorized to clear the sector by any means necessary." Sarah nodded grimly. 1 week to bridge a gap between species that had taken human anthropologists decades to accomplish with Earth's great apes. But she had advantages her predecessors lacked. She'd spent months analyzing every piece of footage, every audio recording, every scrap of behavioral data they'd collected on the Kythera. More importantly, she'd noticed something that everyone else had missed. The cubs were the key. That evening, Sarah made her preparations in the cramped quarters of the research station. She'd requisitioned an environmental suit modified for Zirion's atmosphere, basic medical supplies, and most importantly, several containers of preserved Earth proteins that her research suggested might appeal to Kythera physiology. If she was right about their social structure, approaching through the cubs might be the only way to gain the pack's acceptance without triggering their territorial aggression. The Kythera weren't just pack hunters. They were a matriarchal society disguised as a patriarchal one. While the alpha male might appear to lead, Sarah's analysis of their interaction patterns suggested that the real decisions were made by the females, particularly those with cubs. The males were protectors and enforcers, but the females were the true power structure. "You're insane," said Dr. Reeves, the station's geologist, as she watched Sarah check her equipment. "Those things have killed every human who's gotten within 100 meters of them. Every human who approached them like a threat," Sarah corrected. "The key is to approach them the way another Kythera would. I'm not going as a rival predator or a potential threat. I'm going as someone seeking to offer tribute to the cubs." The next morning, Sarah stood at the edge of Kythera territory, a kilometer-wide valley dotted with the thermal vents that provided heat for their dens. The pack was already active, the adults beginning their morning hunt, while the cubs remained safely guarded in the den complex. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. She began her approach slowly, making no effort to hide her presence. The Kythera sentries spotted her immediately, their haunting calls echoing across the valley as they alerted the pack to the intruder. Sarah kept walking, her hands visible and empty except for the offering of protein supplements. The first adult Kithara intercepted her halfway to the den complex. The creature was enormous up close, its head easily level with Sarah's chest, even with its neck lowered in an aggressive posture. Its eyes were in startling violet color, clearly intelligent, and currently filled with lethal intent. It growled low, a sound like grinding stone that Sarah felt in her bones. Sarah stopped immediately and lowered herself to one knee, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground rather than meeting the Kithara's gaze directly. According to her research, direct eye contact was a challenge among their species, something that would certainly result in an attack. Instead, she slowly reached into her pack and withdrew one of the protein containers, setting it on the ground between them before backing away. The Kithara sniffed the offering cautiously, then picked it up in its massive jaws. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought it might simply swallow the container whole, but instead it turned and loped back toward the den complex. Sarah remained kneeling, waiting. Minutes passed. Then more Kithara appeared, emerging from concealed positions around the valley. Sarah counted at least 8 adults, all watching her with the same intelligent, calculating gaze. But none approached closer than 20 meters, and none showed the immediate aggression that had marked previous encounters. Then she heard it. A sound that made her heart race with excitement rather than fear. The chittering, chirping calls of Kithara cubs. And they were getting closer. 3 cubs emerged from behind their guardians, their mottled gray fur making them look like living shadows in the morning light. They were young, probably equivalent to 6-month-old earth wolves, but already showed the predatory grace of their species. They approached Sarah with the fearless curiosity that seemed universal among young predators. Their violet eyes bright with intelligence. The adult Kithara tensed as their cubs approached the strange alien, but none moved to stop them. Sarah realized this was a test. The pack was allowing their most precious members to investigate her precisely because cubs were the ultimate judges of intent. If she meant harm, the cubs would sense it. If she was truly offering peace, they would accept her. Sarah slowly withdrew another protein container, this one smaller and designed for juvenile consumption. She placed it on the ground and again backed away, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. The boldest cub, a female with distinctive silver markings around her ears, approached the offering first. She sniffed it carefully, then looked directly at Sarah. For a moment, human and alien regarded each other across the vast gulf of species difference. Then the cub picked up the container and, instead of retreating to safety, approached Sarah directly. The adult Kithara were now showing clear signs of agitation, their low growls creating a chorus of warning. But the cubs seemed entirely unafraid. The female cub stopped just out of arm's reach and dropped the container at Sarah's feet. Then she sat back on her haunches and waited. Sarah understood. The cub was offering to share the food. In Kithara pack dynamics, this was one of the highest honors possible. It meant the cub saw her not as a threat or an outsider, but as a potential pack member. Slowly, carefully, Sarah opened the container and placed some of the protein supplements on the ground between them. The cub immediately began eating, and within moments the other 2 cubs had joined her. They ate with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of healthy young animals, occasionally looking up at Sarah with what she could only interpret as gratitude. But it was what happened next that convinced Sarah she was on the right path. One of the adult females, a massive creature with battle scars across her flanks, approached the group. Sarah tensed, ready to retreat if necessary. But the female simply lay down beside the cubs and began grooming one of them with her rough tongue. It was acceptance. Not complete, not yet, but it was a beginning. Sarah spent the next 3 hours in the valley, sitting quietly, while the cubs played around her. The adults maintained their vigilant watch, but gradually, they seemed to relax. By midday, when the hunting party returned with their kill, Sarah had achieved something unprecedented: peaceful contact with a Kithara pack. But as she prepared to leave, one of the cubs did something that made her breath catch in her throat. The silver-marked female cub approached her one final time, carrying something in her mouth. She dropped it at Sarah's feet and chittered softly before bounding back to her family. It was a tooth. Not just any tooth, but a massive canine, easily the size of Sarah's thumb. The distinctive color and wear patterns identified it immediately as belonging to an alpha male, though not the current one. This was an ancient tooth, probably passed down through generations as some kind of pack relic. Sarah stared at the gift in amazement. She was no expert on Kithara culture, but the significance of this gesture was unmistakable. The cubs had given her something precious, something that belonged to the pack's most honored ancestors. As she made her way back to the research station, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just first contact anymore. This was the beginning of something much more important. The cubs had accepted her, and through them, she might be able to reach the entire pack. Commander Hayes was waiting for her at the station perimeter, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Dr. Chen, when you didn't report in for 6 hours, we assumed that they'd killed me," Sarah finished, holding up the ancient tooth. "Commander, I think we need to reassess our understanding of the Kithara. This isn't just a territorial dispute anymore. This is about family." That night, Sarah analyzed the tooth using the station's equipment. What she found made her realize that her successful contact with the cubs was just the beginning of a much larger mystery. The tooth was incredibly old, possibly thousands of years, and showed signs of deliberate preservation. More importantly, it contained trace elements that didn't match any known Kithara biology. This wasn't just an ancestral relic. It was evidence of something much more significant. The tooth belonged to a different species entirely, something that had shared this world with the Kithara long before humans arrived. Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the ancient artifact. The cubs hadn't just given her a gift. They'd given her a message, and tomorrow, she would have to return to the pack and try to understand what they were trying to tell her. Outside her window, the twin moons of Xerion Prime cast their pale light across the alien landscape. Somewhere in the valley below, the Kithara pack was settling in for the night, their cubs safe in the warm dens their ancestors had carved from the living rock. And in just 6 days, if Sarah couldn't find a way to bridge the gap between their species, Commander Hayes would give the order that would destroy them all. Sarah returned to the valley at dawn, her equipment pack heavier this time with additional protein supplements and something new. A portable translation matrix she'd spent all night programming with Kithara vocalizations. If her theories about their language were correct, the device might be able to interpret basic concepts, though she doubted it could handle the nuanced communication she suspected the species was capable of. The pack was already aware of her approach. She could see sentries positioned along the valley rim, their dark forms silhouetted against the pale morning sky. But unlike yesterday, there was no immediate challenge. Instead, she heard a sound that made her heart leap, the excited chittering of cubs who recognized her return. The 3 cubs from yesterday bounded toward her across the rocky terrain, their movements still clumsy with youth, but showing the developing grace that would make them apex predators. The silver-marked female was in the lead, her violet eyes bright with what Sarah could only interpret as joy. "Hello, little ones," Sarah whispered, kneeling as they approached. She used the same submissive posture as yesterday. But this time the cubs showed no hesitation. They surrounded her immediately, sniffing at her pack and vocalizing in rapid bursts that her translation matrix couldn't parse. But it was what happened next that told Sarah her acceptance had deepened overnight. One of the adult females approached, the same battle-scarred matriarch who had joined them yesterday. This time, however, she came closer, settling into a resting position just 3 meters away, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to show trust. Sarah activated her translation matrix and spoke a simple greeting in Standard, watching as the device processed her words and emitted a series of low-frequency sounds that approximated Kithara communication patterns. The female's ears twitched in apparent surprise, and she replied with a complex vocalization that the matrix translated as, "Strange scent bringer returns. Cubs, happy safe." It wasn't perfect, but it was communication. Sarah felt a thrill of excitement as she realized she was conducting the first real conversation between humans and Kithara. "I bring gifts for cubs," she replied through the device. I wish to understand pack wisdom. The female's response was longer and more complex, with emotional undertones that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. What came through was, Cubs speak true about strange scent-bringer. Heart smell shows no pack threat. But ancient warning speaks danger approach. Ancient warning. Sarah's pulse quickened as she remembered the tooth the cubs had given her. What ancient warning? She asked. The female's response chilled her. Sky metal bringers come before. Make mountain pain, make water poison, make pack death. Ancient Alpha fought sky metal bringers. Only tooth remains of brave death. Sky metal bringers. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the translation. The Kithara had encountered spacefaring species before, and apparently, it hadn't gone well. The ancient tooth wasn't just a relic of a great alpha. It was a memorial to a war that had nearly exterminated them. We are not like the sky metal bringers of before, Sarah said carefully. We seek understanding, not mountain pain. The female regarded her for a long moment, then made a sound that the matrix couldn't translate at all. But the cubs seemed to understand. The silver-marked female approached Sarah and gently nudged her hand with her snout, a gesture that was unmistakably affectionate. Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself gradually accepted into the daily rhythm of the pack. The cubs brought her small gifts. Interesting rocks, fragments of shed fur from the adults, even a piece of the previous night's hunt. Each offering was clearly meaningful in Kithara culture, and Sarah accepted them with the gravity they deserved. But it was during the afternoon rest period that Sarah made her most significant discovery. The pack had settled into the shade of a thermal vent cluster, the adults dozing while the cubs continued to play. Sarah was documenting her observations when the silver-marked cub approached her with something new. This time it wasn't just one tooth, but three. All ancient, all from different alphas if the size variations were any indication. The cub dropped them at Sarah's feet, and then did something that made her breath catch. She howled, not the playful chittering of a youngster, but a complex, haunting call that was immediately answered by every adult in the pack. Within moments, the entire pack had formed a circle around Sarah and the cubs. 17 adult Kithara, their massive forms creating a living wall of predatory power, all watching her with intense violet eyes. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized this was no longer a casual visit. This was some kind of formal ceremony. The pack's alpha male, Shadowfang, approached slowly. His massive form dwarfed even the other adults. And up close, Sarah could see that his scars weren't just from hunting, they were from battle. Old wounds that spoke of conflicts with something far more dangerous than the planet's native fauna. He stopped just outside of striking distance and regarded her with ancient, intelligent eyes. Through her translation matrix, he spoke. Strange scent-bringer receives ancient trust from cubs. Pack wisdom says cubs see true heart, where adults see only strange smell. Will strange scent-bringer accept ancient burden? Sarah looked down at the teeth at her feet, understanding suddenly that this was a moment of profound importance. The cubs hadn't just been playing or showing affection, they'd been testing her, and apparently, she'd passed. But accepting these ancient relics would mean accepting whatever responsibility came with them. What is the ancient burden? She asked. Shadowfang's response came in a complex combination of vocalizations and physical gestures that the Matrix struggled to interpret. What came through was, Sky Metal Bringer's return. Pack wisdom knows this truth from star patterns and earth trembling. Ancient burden is to warn, to prepare, to remember the brave death of those who fought before. Sarah felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders. The Kithara knew about the mining consortium. Somehow, through methods she couldn't understand, they were aware that humans were planning to begin operations in their territory, and they thought history was about to repeat itself. But there was something else in the Alpha's communication. Something the Matrix was having difficulty translating. It kept using a phrase that came through as, pack protection song, but which seemed to carry deeper meaning. I accept the ancient burden, Sarah said formally, kneeling to collect the teeth. As her fingers closed around them, She felt their weight. Not just physical, but emotional. These weren't just artifacts. They were memories, preserved and passed down through generations of Kithara, who had survived whatever catastrophe the first sky metal bringers had brought. The pack's reaction was immediate and profound. Every adult began vocalizing at once, creating a complex harmony that Sarah felt as much as heard. It was beautiful and terrifying, a sound that spoke of loss and hope, of ancestors honored and futures protected. The cubs joined in with their higher voices, creating counterpoint melodies that wove through the adult harmonies. As the song reached its crescendo, Sarah realized what she was hearing. This was their history, encoded in sound. Each voice carried part of the story. Each harmony represented a different aspect of their cultural memory. And somehow, by accepting the ancient burden, she had become part of that song. When the vocalizations finally faded, the silver-marked cub approached her one more time. This time, she carried something that made Sarah's heart stop. It was a collar of sorts, woven from what looked like the shed fur of multiple generations of pack members, with the ancient teeth integrated as focal points. It was clearly ceremonial, clearly important, and clearly meant for her. With gentle care, the cub placed the collar around Sarah's neck. It was surprisingly light despite the weight of the teeth, and it seemed to radiate warmth against her skin. The moment it settled into place, every Kithara in the pack lowered their heads in what was unmistakably a gesture of respect. Pack sister by choice, Shadowfang declared through the translation matrix. Strange scent bringer no more. Now carries ancient trust, speaks for cub's safety, shares pack protection song. Sarah stood slowly, acutely aware that everything had changed. She was no longer an outside observer trying to make contact. She was now formally part of the pack, with all the responsibilities and privileges that entailed. And based on what she'd learned about their history, those responsibilities might be more dangerous than she'd imagined. That evening, as Sarah prepared to return to the research station, she was accompanied, not by adults, but by all three cubs, who seemed determined to escort her to the edge of their territory. The silver-marked female walked directly beside her, occasionally bumping against her leg in a gesture of affection that was startlingly similar to a domestic dog's behavior. At the territorial boundary, the cubs stopped, but not before the silver-marked female presented Sarah with one final gift. This time it was a small piece of carved stone, no bigger than her thumb, depicting a Kithara cub being protected by a figure that was clearly not of their species. The carving was ancient, the stone worn smooth by countless hands, but the message was clear. Humans and Kithara had worked together before. As Sarah made her way back to the research station, her mind reeled with implications. The collar around her neck seemed to pulse with warmth, and she could swear she occasionally heard echoes of the pack protection song on the wind. She was no longer just a xenobiologist studying an alien species. She was now a bridge between two worlds, carrying the weight of ancient trust and the hope of preventing a historical tragedy from repeating itself. Commander Hayes was waiting for her again, but this time, his expression was very different. Dr. Chen, we've been monitoring your vitals all day. There were several periods when your stress indicators suggested extreme danger, but you never called for extraction. What happened out there? Sarah touched the collar around her neck, feeling the ancient teeth shift slightly against the woven fur. Commander, I need to speak with you privately. And then I need to contact the Colonial Senate directly. We have a problem that's much bigger than a simple territorial dispute. As they walked toward the station commander's office, Sarah could hear the distant sound of Kithara vocalizations drifting across the valley. The pack was singing again, but this time she thought she could distinguish individual voices within the harmony. Somewhere in that complex musical story was her own voice now, woven into the ancient song of a species that had survived genocide once and was preparing to do so again. But this time, they wouldn't be facing the sky metal bringers alone. In her quarters that night, Sarah carefully examined the carved stone the cubs had given her. Under high magnification, she could see details that had been worn away by age, but were still visible to trained eyes. The protective figure in the carving wasn't just humanoid. It was specifically human, down to details of anatomy and posture that could only have come from direct observation. Humans and Kithara had been allies once, long before the current colonization effort. And if Sarah was reading the implications correctly, they'd fought together against another spacefaring species that had tried to exploit Xerion Prime's resources without regard for its native inhabitants. History was indeed about to repeat itself. But this time, Sarah intended to make sure it had a very different ending. The question was whether she could convince the colonial authorities to listen to a xenobiologist who now wore the ceremonial collar of an alien pack before it was too late for everyone involved. The emergency session of the Colonial Senate was conducted via quantum link from the research station, with Sarah standing before a holographic panel of 12 senators whose faces showed varying degrees of skepticism and impatience. Commander Hayes stood behind her, his expression carefully neutral, while the collar of ancient Kithara teeth lay prominently on the table between them. "Dr. Chen," Senator Morrison began, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're asking us to halt a multi-billion credit mining operation based on the alleged historical memories of alien predators and some old teeth. I hope you understand how that sounds." Sarah kept her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her. "Senator, with respect, I'm asking you to consider evidence that this planet has already experienced one genocidal resource extraction operation, and that we're about to repeat the same mistake. The Kithara aren't just animals. They're a sophisticated species with detailed historical records, and they remember what happened the last time Sky Metal Bringers arrived. Even if we accept your translation of their communication," Senator Briggs interjected, "how can we verify these supposed historical events? For all we know, you're anthropomorphizing natural predator behavior into some kind of false civilization narrative." Sarah had expected this argument. She activated her portable display unit, bringing up the detailed scans of the ancient teeth. "The teeth aren't just old, senators. They contain trace elements that don't exist naturally on Xerion Prime. Specifically, they contain isotopes of rare earth elements that are only created by industrial plasma refining processes. The Kithara didn't just remember a war with Sky Metal Bringers, they have physical evidence of it." The senators exchanged glances, and Sarah could see their certainty beginning to waver. Senator Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that another human colony already attempted to exploit this planet?" "Not human," Sarah replied. "The isotope signatures don't match any human industrial processes, but they do match theoretical projections for Zerathi refining technology." The silence that followed was profound. The Zerathi were the boogeyman of human space exploration, a nomadic species that appeared without warning, stripped planets of valuable resources, and disappeared again, leaving behind ecological devastation and often extinct indigenous species. They hadn't been seen in this sector for over a century, but their reputation for ruthless exploitation preceded them across the galaxy. "You're saying the Zerathi were here before," Senator Morrison said slowly. "And the Kithara fought them, and survived," Sarah emphasized. "Senators, we're not just looking at an indigenous species that needs protection. We're looking at a species that has already proven they can resist technologically superior invaders. They have tactics, strategies, and most importantly, they have the will to fight for their world." Commander Hayes stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, show them the carved stone." Sarah placed the ancient carving on the display platform, magnifying it so the senators could see the details clearly. This artifact predates any known human presence in this sector by at least 500 years. But that figure being protected by the Kithara cub, it's unmistakably human. Senators, there was already an alliance between humans and Kithara once before. We fought the Zerathi together, and we won. The implications hung in the air like a charged field. Senator Torres was the first to speak. "Are you suggesting there was a previous human colony here that we have no record of?" "I'm suggesting something much more significant," Sarah replied. "I think there was a first contact situation centuries ago, probably with an exploration vessel that encountered the Zerathi invasion. The humans could have simply left, protected themselves, avoided the conflict. Instead, they chose to stand with the Kithara and fight, and they all died for it," Senator Briggs said grimly. "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but they also saved an entire species from extinction. And now the Kithara remember. They remember that not all Sky Metal Bringers come as conquerors. Some come as allies. Senator Morrison stood, her expression thoughtful. Dr. Chen, assuming we accept your interpretation of these events, what exactly are you proposing? The mining consortium has legal rights to Sector 7, and their preliminary surveys show deposits worth trillions of credits. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine the fate of both species on Xerion Prime. I propose we honor the ancient alliance. The Kithara know this planet better than any geological survey. They know where resources can be extracted without destroying the ecosystem, and they know how to defend those locations if the Zerathi return. Instead of treating them as an obstacle to mining, we treat them as partners. Partners? Senator Chen looked skeptical. Dr. Chen, you're talking about predators that have killed every previous contact team, because every previous contact team approached them as conquerors rather than allies, Sarah shot back. Senators, I've spent days with the Kithara pack. They're not mindless animals. They have technology we don't understand, knowledge of defensive strategies that kept them alive against the Zerathi. And most importantly, they're willing to trust humans again. Despite their historical trauma, the debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Sarah answered question after question, defending her interpretation of Kithara culture and her understanding of the historical evidence. But in the end, it was Commander Hayes who provided the argument that swayed the vote. Senators, he said during a brief recess, Dr. Chen has accomplished something that no one thought possible. She's established peaceful contact with a species that has shown nothing but hostility to humans for decades. Even if her historical theories are completely wrong, the tactical value of having the Kithara as allies rather than enemies cannot be overstated. And if she's right about the Zerathi connection, we may need those allies sooner than we think. The final vote was 7-5 in favor of suspending mining operations pending further negotiation with the Kithara through Dr. Chen as an intermediary. But even as Sarah felt relief at the decision, she knew the real work was just beginning. 2 days later, Sarah returned to the valley with a formal delegation from the colonial government. The humans wore full environmental suits and carried no weapons, following protocols Sarah had developed based on Kithara cultural sensitivities. But as they crested the ridge overlooking the pack's territory, Sarah realized something was wrong. The valley was empty. Where are they? Commander Hayes asked through the comm system, his voice tight with concern. Sarah checked her sensors, but there was no sign of the pack anywhere in their usual territory. The thermal vents still provided their steady warmth. The dens showed signs of recent habitation. But the Kithara themselves had vanished. Then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. The pack protection song, but changed. Urgent. Filled with warning and fear. It was coming from the far side of the valley, beyond the ridgeline that marked the edge of the pack's usual range. They're not gone, Sarah realized. They're preparing for war. As if summoned by her words, the silver-marked cub appeared on the ridge above them. She looked larger than Sarah remembered, her adult coloration beginning to show through the juvenile modeling. The cub descended toward them with careful grace, but her body language spoke of extreme urgency. When she reached Sarah, she immediately began vocalizing rapidly. Her words too fast and complex for the translation matrix to fully process. What came through was fragmented but terrifying. Sky metal ships, star pattern wrong, ancient enemy returns, pack calls for ally human. Sarah's heart hammered as she understood. The Zerathi were coming back. Somehow, the Kithara had detected their approach through methods human technology couldn't match. And they were calling on the ancient alliance, expecting humans to stand with them as their ancestors had centuries before. Commander, Sarah said urgently, we need to contact the fleet immediately. The Kithara have early warning capabilities we don't understand. But if they say the Zerathi are coming, we need to take it seriously. Hayes was already activating his long-range communicator, but the response he received made his face go pale. Dr. Chen, Fleet Command is reporting multiple unidentified vessels approaching the outer system. They appeared on sensors 20 minutes ago, moving in formation at speeds that exceed any known human technology. The cub continued her urgent vocalizations, and this time the translation matrix managed to process a complete thought. Pack, Alpha, calls ally human, to den of memory. Ancient weapons wait. Ancient alliance needs ancient power. Sarah looked at the human delegation, then at the cub, who was clearly expecting her to follow immediately. The choice was obvious. Commander, take the delegation back to the station and prepare defensive measures. I'm going with her. Dr. Chen, we don't know what ancient weapons means in their culture. You could be walking into the only chance we have of surviving what's coming, Sarah interrupted. Sir, the Cathara fought the Zirathi once and won. If they have weapons or knowledge that could help us now, I have to try. The cub had already begun moving toward the far ridge, looking back impatiently for Sarah to follow. Making a decision that would either save two species or get her killed, Sarah followed the young Cathara into territory no human had ever seen. The den of memory was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Hidden deep within a network of caves that extended far beneath the surface, the chamber was vast, its walls covered with intricate carvings that told the history of the Cathara in stunning detail. But it wasn't the artwork that took her breath away. It was the technology. Integrated into the living rock were crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light, their surfaces covered with symbols that definitely weren't Cathara in origin. The entire chamber hummed with barely contained energy, and Sarah's instruments went crazy trying to analyze the power signatures they were detecting. Human technology from Ancient Alliance, Shadowfang explained through her translation matrix. Starship crashed here when first Sky Metal Bringers came. Human packmates taught Cathara to use star weapons before Brave Death came. Sarah stared in amazement as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't just a memorial chamber. It was an armory. The crashed human ship had been integrated into the cave system, its weapons and defensive systems preserved and maintained by generations of Cathara who had learned to operate technology far beyond their natural development level. How many ships? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. 7 and 7 and 3, came the reply. 17 ships. A full Zarathi raiding fleet. Sarah activated her emergency communicator, patching directly into Fleet Command. This is Dr. Chen, emergency priority. The Zarathi are returning to Zerion Prime with 17 vessels. I'm currently in a Cathara installation that contains preserved human military technology from a previous engagement. Request immediate backup and authorization to coordinate joint defensive operations. The response came immediately from Admiral Singh, the sector fleet commander. Dr. Chen, are you saying the Cathara have human weapons? I'm saying they have human weapons that have been specifically adapted to fight Zarathi raiders, maintained and operated for centuries by a species that remembers how to use them effectively. Admiral, we're looking at humanity's best hope of surviving the next few hours. As if summoned by her words, the chamber filled with Cathara as the entire pack emerged from hidden passages. But these weren't the same creatures Sarah had come to know. These were warriors preparing for battle. Their movements precise and coordinated, their eyes blazing with determined fury. The silver-marked cub approached her one final time, but she was no longer a cub. The stress of the approaching conflict had triggered a rapid maturation process that Sarah hadn't known was possible in their species. In the span of days, she had become a young adult, her adult coloration fully developed, her size nearly matching the other females. Around her neck, she wore something that made Sarah's heart stop. It was a collar similar to the one Sarah wore, but made from human materials. Woven into its structure were pieces of metal and polymer that could only have come from the ancient crashed ship, creating a physical symbol of the alliance between their species. Pack sister by choice, the young Cathara said, her voice now carrying the deeper tones of adulthood. Ancient alliance calls. Will Star Sister fight beside Pack? Above them, Sarah could hear the distant sound of atmospheric entry, the screaming roar of ships not designed for planetary landing approaching at combat velocity. The Zarathi had arrived, and they were coming in force. Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled Cathara, at the ancient human weapons that had been preserved against this moment, at the young alien who had grown from cub to warrior in a matter of days. Then she placed her hand on the nearest control crystal, and felt it respond to her touch with warm recognition. "The Alliance endures," she said formally. "Let's show them what humans and Kithara can do together." The Alliance and Kithara. Let's show them what humans and Kithara. Let's show them what humans and Kithara. Let's show them what humans and Kithara. As the ancient weapons powered up and the pack began their battle songs, Sarah realized that she truly was no longer an outsider. The cubs had delivered the alpha's tooth, and in accepting it, she had become something new. Not just human, not just pack member, but a bridge between species that would either save both their worlds or die trying. The sky above, filled with alien ships, but in the depths of Zerion Prime, an ancient alliance prepared to make its stand.